They mocked the pregnant girl for being too fat until the lonely rancher married her. In a dusty frontier town, under the clang of the church bell, a young girl steps off the stagecoach. The crowd laughs, pointing at her swollen figure, calling her names too cruel to repeat. But one man refuses to let her be shamed. A rancher, silent, weathered, alone, steps forward and does the unthinkable. He claims her hand in front of them all. But marriage is only the beginning. As the cabin lamp burns through long nights, secrets rise like storm clouds. The child she carries has ties to the very men trying to steal the rancher's land. Poison. In the water, a letter she hides. A past that won't stay buried. What happens when mercy is stronger than mockery, but betrayal cuts deeper than a knife? Will love be enough to save them when the railroad comes for everything? Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers. The ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The stagecoach rattled to a stop, sending dust swirling in the morning sunlight. Clara Mayfield gripped her worn carpetbag tighter, her other hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. The wooden steps creaked as she carefully made her way down, doing her best to keep her balance. "Would you look at that?" a woman's sharp voice cut through the air. "She's bigger than my prize sow." Cruel laughter rippled through the small crowd gathered near the stage stop. Clara's cheeks burned as she kept her eyes fixed on her dusty boots. She had endured similar treatment back home in Kansas after Thomas, the smooth-talking railroad agent, had disappeared. But here, in this Colorado town where she'd hoped for a fresh start, the mockery felt even more bitter. "Reckon she ate too." "Much trail dust," another voice jeered. "Or maybe something else entirely." More laughter followed, and Clara blinked back hot tears. Her fingers trembled on the handle of her carpetbag as she tried to walk with dignity past the whispering onlookers. The weight of her child made each step feel uncertain on the uneven ground. "Look how she waddles," someone called out. "Like a duck that's lost its way." The laughter grew louder, but suddenly a deep voice cut through the cruel chorus. "That's enough." The words weren't shouted, but they carried such authority that the crowd fell silent. Clara looked up to see a tall man striding toward her. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his dark eyes held a mixture of kindness and steel. A rancher, by the look of his worn leather vest and boots. "Name's Jonas Walker," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was gentle now, meant for her ears alone. "These folks seem to have forgotten their manners, Miss Mayfield," Clara managed. "Clara Mayfield." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Jonas Walker stepped closer. He studied her face for a long moment, and Clara found herself standing straighter under his steady gaze. There was no mockery in his eyes, only a deep understanding that made her heart flutter strangely. "Miss Mayfield," he said clearly so everyone could hear, "I own a ranch 5 miles outside of town. It's a good piece of land with a solid house that's been too empty since my wife passed." He paused, and Clara could see the old grief etched in the lines around his eyes. "I reckon we could help each other if you're willing. Would you consider becoming my wife?" A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. She saw the town's pastor frozen mid-step on the boardwalk, his mouth hanging open. A woman dropped her basket of eggs in shock. Clara studied Jonas Walker's face, searching for any sign of cruel jest or hidden motives. But she found only sincerity in his weather-worn features. His eyes held the same loneliness she'd seen in her own reflection these past months, and something else too, a quiet strength that spoke of honor and kindness. Clara's voice wavered. She straightened her shoulders and spoke more firmly. "Why would you make such an offer to someone you've just met? Someone in my condition?" Jonas's expression softened slightly. "Because I've seen enough cruelty in this world to last 10 lifetimes, Miss Mayfield. And I reckon sometimes the good Lord puts two broken pieces together to make something whole again." He gestured to the silent crowd. "These folks can whisper all they want, but I see a woman with courage enough to face their scorn with her head high. That's the kind of strength it takes to be a rancher's wife." Clara felt tears welling up again, but these were different from before. For the first time since Thomas had abandoned her, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart. Jonas Walker's quiet dignity and unexpected kindness had transformed her moment of deepest humiliation into something almost sacred. The crowd remained silent, watching this extraordinary scene unfold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as Clara took a deep breath. She looked into Jonas Walker's steady eyes and saw the promise of something she'd thought forever lost: a chance at dignity, a family at home. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "I would be honored to consider your offer." A slight smile touched Jonas's weathered face as he nodded. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of a promise, one that would change both their lives forever. Small clapboard church stood quiet in the midday sun as Jonas Walker guided Clara up the worn wooden steps. Her heart pounded against her ribs as whispers followed them through the door. The weathered floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and the musty scent of old hymnals filled the air. Reverend Thompson stood at his pulpit, his weathered face creased with uncertainty as Jonas explained their intention to marry immediately. The preacher's eyes flickered to Clara's condition, then back to Jonas's steady gaze. "This is rather sudden," Reverend Thompson said, adjusting his collar. "Perhaps a proper courtship period would be more appropriate." "With respect, Reverend," Jonas replied, his voice firm but gentle, "the Lord's timing ain't always what we expect. But his guidance is clear enough when it comes to doing right by those in need." Clara's fingers twisted nervously in her skirts as several townspeople filed into the church pews. Their whispers rustled like dry leaves across the wooden floor. She recognized faces from the stage stop, some wearing expressions of judgment, others merely curious. The Reverend sighed, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Sarah," he called to his wife, "would you fetch the marriage registry?" Clara trembled as she stood before the altar, but Jonas's rough hand closed warmly over hers. He leaned close, his voice so low only she could hear. "No shame belongs to a mother carrying life, Miss Mayfield. The good book tells us children are a blessing." Tears pricked at her eyes as she squeezed his hand in gratitude. The afternoon light streamed through the simple glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn floor as Reverend Thompson opened his Bible. The ceremony was brief, their voices echoing in the hushed church. Clara's "I do" quavered but held firm, while Jonas's response rang clear and strong. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Clara felt a curious mixture of relief and unreality wash over her. Sarah Thompson had prepared a modest reception in the church basement. Coffee in chipped cups and fresh biscuits arranged on blue willow plates. The small crowd that gathered maintained a careful distance, but Jonas proudly introduced her to each person as Mrs. Walker. Clara noticed how some women's eyes softened at his gentle insistence on her new title, while others turned away with tight lips and shaking heads. "Welcome to our town, Mrs. Walker," Sarah Thompson said kindly as she pressed a warm biscuit into Clara's hand. "It takes courage to make a new start." As the afternoon waned, Jonas helped Clara into his wagon. The wooden seat was hard beneath her, but Jonas had thoughtfully placed a folded blanket for her comfort. The wagon wheels rumbled over the rutted road as they left town behind, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Clara studied the passing landscape with growing interest. Broad fields stretched toward distant mountains, the spring grass waving in the evening breeze. After nearly an hour's journey, Jonas turned the wagon onto a narrower track that led to a simple log house. A lonely corral stood nearby, where several horses lifted their heads at their approach. "It ain't much," Jonas said quietly, helping her down from the wagon. "But the land's good, and the house is solid." Clara gazed at her new home, taking in the sturdy logs and the neat vegetable patch to one side. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, telling her Jonas had arranged for someone to prepare for their arrival. The thought touched her deeply. Inside, a simple supper waited on the rough-hewn table, beans, cornbread, and coffee keeping warm by the hearth. They ate quietly at first, the enormity of the day's changes settling over them both. Finally, Clara gathered her courage. "Mr. Walker, Jonas," she began, her voice soft in the lamplight. "I need to tell you about the baby's father." She swallowed hard. "He was a railroad man, Thomas Caldwell. He promised marriage, but when I told him about the baby, he disappeared." Jonas listened without interruption, his face unreadable in the flickering light. When she finished, he simply nodded and poured her another cup of coffee. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable, like a shared understanding that needed no words. Through the open window, the cool evening air carried the sound of coyotes calling in the distance. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, feeling the weight of the day's events in her bones. Yet despite her exhaustion and the uncertainty of her sudden marriage, she felt something she hadn't expected, hope as vast and promising as the Colorado sky outside. Dawn crept through the cabin's small windows, painting golden squares on the rough plank floor. Clara blinked awake in the spare room Jonas had prepared, her hand instinctively touching her swollen belly. The quiet felt different from Kansas, deeper, more complete. Only the distant lowing of cattle broke the morning stillness. She dressed quickly in her worn cotton dress, smoothing the fabric over her rounded middle. The kitchen beckoned, and nervous energy propelled her forward. This was her chance to prove her worth as a wife, even if their marriage had sprung from necessity rather than love. The kitchen was sparse, but tidy. Clara found a small sack of flour in a corner cabinet and some bacon hanging from a hook. As she searched for a pan, Jonas's boots scraped the doorway. He paused, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Pans are under there," he said quietly, pointing to a low cupboard. "Matches beside the stove if you need them." Clara nodded gratefully. "I'd like to make biscuits, if that's all right." "Reckon that would be fine." Jonas moved through the kitchen, showing her where he kept basic supplies. "Coffee's in that tin. Butter's down in the root cellar. Hatches by your feet." His voice was gentle, patient. Clara felt some of her tension ease as she worked, mixing biscuits and laying bacon in the hot pan. Soon, the cabin filled with welcome breakfast smells. They sat across from each other at the worn table, steam rising from their coffee cups. The silence stretched between them until Jonas cleared his throat. "Figure you should know," he said, studying his plate. "I was married. Before. Sarah, she died in childbirth 8 years ago. Lost the baby, too." His words came slow, like each one hurt. "Ain't been much for company since then." Clara's heart ached for his loss. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "That must have been terribly hard." Jonas nodded, then looked up at her. "What about you? What brought you out here from Kansas?" Clara's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "I worked at my pa's store in Lawrence. That's where I met Thomas, the railroad man." She swallowed hard. "He courted me proper at first. Said all the right things. When I told him about the baby, he disappeared the next day. Left me nothing but shame." "Ain't no shame in being deceived by a snake," Jonas said firmly. "Man makes promises, he ought to keep them." After breakfast, Jonas led Clara outside. The morning air was crisp, and the vast landscape took her breath away. Mountains rose purple in the distance, while closer at hand, spring grass rippled like a green ocean. "Property runs from that ridge to the river," Jonas explained, pointing. "'Bout 400 head of cattle, though they're scattered wide this time of year." He showed her the essential parts of the ranch, the barn with its sweet hay smell, The chicken coop where a few hens scratched, the corral where his horses dozed in the morning sun. The fences needed work in places, rails hanging loose or posts leaning. "Water's our lifeblood out here," Jonas said as they walked to a narrow irrigation ditch that drew from the river. Clear water burbled along its course. "This ditch feeds the south pasture. Without it, the grass would wither by July." Clara marveled at the quiet. No clattering wagons, no shouting peddlers, no constant bustle of town life. Just wind in the grass and distant cows. They spent the day settling into a careful rhythm, Clara organizing the cabin's sparse supplies while Jonas tended to ranch work. As evening approached, they sat in comfortable silence by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The sharp knock at the door startled them both. Jonas rose, hand brushing his belt where his pistol hung. He opened the door to find a rider in a dark coat, railroad company badge glinting on his chest. "Evening," the man said curtly, extending an envelope. "From Foreman Caldwell." Clara's heart jumped at the name. Could it be related to Thomas? But she kept silent as Jonas took the envelope. The rider touched his hat and disappeared into the gathering dusk. Jonas unfolded the paper, holding it close to the lamplight. His jaw tightened as he read, and Clara saw his hand clench around the paper's edge. "What is it?" she asked softly. "Railroads demanding water rights to the river," Jonas said, his voice hard. "Says if I don't sign them over, they'll pursue other means of acquisition." He looked up, meeting Clara's worried gaze. "Without that water, this ranch dies." The lamp flickered, casting uncertain shadows across the cabin walls as they sat with this new threat between them. Morning sunlight blazed across the pasture as Clara followed Jonas to the broken fence line. Her boots, borrowed from Jonas's stores, felt clumsy on her feet, but she was determined to help. The spring wind tugged at her skirts as she carried the lighter tools, hammer, nails, and a coil of wire. "You don't have to do this," Jonas said, eyeing her condition. "Fence mending's hard work." Clara straightened her back. "I may be carrying, but I'm not made of china. My pa taught me ranch work before he passed." Jonas nodded, a glimmer of respect crossing his weathered face. He showed her how to hold the rails steady while he hammered, and soon they fell into an efficient rhythm. Clara's hands grew dirty, but satisfaction warmed her chest as each section of fence grew stronger. Around mid-morning, hoofbeats approached. 2 riders appeared, neighbors from down the valley. They slowed their horses, staring openly at Clara working alongside Jonas. "Morning, Walker," one called out, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and judgment. The men exchanged meaningful glances, whispering as they rode past. Jonas's jaw tightened, but he kept working. "Pay them no mind," he said quietly. "Folks'll talk themselves tired eventually." Clara wiped sweat from her brow, determined to prove herself. When she struggled with a heavy rail, Jonas steadied it without comment, his quiet support worth more than words. By early afternoon, a boy on a spotted pony galloped up, waving a yellow envelope. "Telegram from town for Mr. Walker," he shouted. "Station master says it's urgent." Jonas tore open the envelope, his expression darkening as he read. "Railroads pushing harder," he said grimly. "We need to ride into town." The wagon ride was bumpy, but Clara held tight to the seat, watching the landscape roll past. In town, people stopped to stare as Jonas helped her down. Some faces had softened since her arrival. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, even offered a slight smile. Others turned away, muttering behind raised hands. At the general store, Clara paused before a bolt of cheerful yellow cotton. "For curtains," she explained when Jonas raised an eyebrow. "Every home needs a woman's touch." "Ain't had curtains since Sarah," Jonas said softly, then cleared his throat. "Get what you need." While the shopkeeper measured the fabric, Clara overheard whispers. "Married that pregnant girl. Railroad causing trouble. Walkers. Finally got someone cooking for him again." The sun was setting as they drove home, casting long shadows across the prairie. Jonas cleared his throat. "Never thought I'd see another woman fussing in my kitchen," he admitted. "Or sewing things for the house. Sarah loved making everything pretty." Clara smiled, hearing the warmth beneath his gruff words. "Every house needs curtains and good cooking to be a home," she said. "Even a rough ranch house." Back at the cabin, Clara served up a simple supper of beans and cornbread. They ate quietly, the telegram's warning hanging between them. Outside, a coyote's lonely howl echoed across the darkening prairie, making Clara shiver at the reminder of their isolation. But as she looked around the cabin, lit by the steady glow of the lamp, something settled in her heart. The walls that had seemed so strange yesterday felt more familiar now. Her fingers itched to start sewing those curtains, to add touches that would make this place truly theirs. Jonas caught her looking around and nodded slightly, as if reading her thoughts. "Reckon you'll have this place looking like a proper home." "Soon enough," he said. Clara's hand rested on her belly as she smiled. Perhaps here, despite the railroad's threats and the neighbors' whispers, she had finally found where she belonged. The week unfolded in a rhythm of shared labor and quiet understanding. Each morning, Clara rose before the sun touched the eastern horizon, her feet padding softly across the wooden floor while Jonas slept. The kitchen became her domain as she worked dough with strong hands, the familiar motions bringing comfort in this new life. Outside, the chickens greeted her with eager clucks, scratching at the feed she scattered. Their fresh eggs filled her gathering basket, a small victory in making herself useful. Through the morning mist, she watched Jonas ride out to check the cattle, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape. Together, they tackled the endless tasks of ranch life. Clara's swollen fingers grew calloused as she helped Jonas replace rotted boards in the barn roof. She steadied herself on the ladder, passing up tools and boards while he hammered overhead. The spring wind carried the sharp scent of fresh-cut wood and the steady rhythm of their work. "You're stronger than you look," Jonas observed one afternoon, watching her wrestle with a stubborn fence post. "Farm life in Kansas wasn't gentle," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "Neither was losing Mae Young." In the evenings, Clara's needle flashed in the lamplight. The yellow curtains took shape, bringing cheerful warmth to the cabin's stern windows. She hummed old hymns while she worked, and sometimes caught Jonas watching her with a distant look, as if seeing shadows of his past. On Wednesday evening, hoofbeats announced visitors. Martha and Jim Holley rode up just before supper, their arrival barely disguised as a neighborly call. Clara recognized the curiosity in Martha's sharp eyes as she dismounted. "Thought we ought to welcome the new Mrs. Walker proper," Martha announced, her gaze taking in Clara's condition. "Brought some preserves." Clara served up her fresh bread and a hearty stew, determined to show her worth as a ranch wife. The conversation circled carefully until Martha could contain herself no longer. "When's the baby due?" she asked bluntly. "Must be soon by the look." The table fell silent. Clara felt Jonas tense beside her, but she lifted her chin and met Martha's gaze. "Late summer," she said clearly. "God willing, the child will be strong and healthy." "And the father?" Martha pressed. "Is not worth mentioning," Jonas cut in, his voice firm. "The child will bear the Walker name, same as its mother." Clara touched his arm gently. "It's all right, Jonas." She turned to Martha. "I was foolish in trusting. He was a railroad man who promised marriage, then vanished. But I won't hide in shame. Every child is a blessing, even if it's beginning." "Wasn't proper." Martha sat back, studying Clara with new eyes. Jim Holley cleared his throat. "Railroads causing trouble all up and down the valley," he offered. "Trying to buy up water rights cheap, threatening those who won't sell." The conversation turned to safer ground, and when the Hales left, there was genuine warmth in Martha's goodbye. You come by if you need anything, she told Clara. Especially when your time comes. After they rode away, Clara and Jonas sat by the fire. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain. The railroad won't stop, Jonas said quietly. They want every piece of river frontage they can get. Then pushing folks out all across the territory. Clara's needle continued its steady rhythm as she finished the last curtain. My mother always said God can redeem the broken roads, she said softly. When Pa died and we lost the farm, she held on to her faith. Said the Lord works in ways we can't see. Jonas stared into the fire. Haven't given much thought to God since Sarah died, he admitted. Seemed he wasn't listening then. Sometimes. The answer comes years later, Clara said. Like finding each other when we both needed help. The first drops of rain pattered against the roof, a gentle drumming that filled the comfortable silence. Jonas rose to trim the lamp, its warm glow softening the cabin's rough edges. Clara's new curtains stirred in the breeze from the window, and the thunder rolled closer, but she felt no fear. Yomei sounds like she was wise, Jonas said finally. Settling back in his chair, Clara smiled, remembering her mother's steady faith. She taught me to look for light in dark times. To trust that morning always comes. The rain fell harder now. But inside the cabin, the lamplight held strong. Clara finished her final stitch and held up the curtain with satisfaction. Together, they sat in the growing darkness, listening to the storm and sharing the quiet peace of two souls learning to trust again. The storm's fury lasted through the night, drumming against the cabin roof until dawn. Clara woke to find Jonas already at the window, his face creased with worry as he studied the flooded pastures below. Calves might be stranded, he said, pulling on his oilskin coat. Best we check on them. Clara didn't hesitate. I'm coming with you, she said, wrapping herself in the spare coat Jonas offered. It hung loose everywhere except her middle, where the baby made its presence known. They rode out together, rain streaming from their hat brims. The horses picked their way carefully through the muddy ground, while Jonas kept a watchful eye on Clara. The valley had transformed overnight. Usually dry ditches now ran like rivers, and the low pastures had become shallow lakes. A distant bawling caught their attention. Through the curtain of rain, they spotted 3 calves huddled on a small rise, water rising around them. Jonas spurred his horse forward, with Clara following close behind. Stay back, Jonas called over his shoulder. Ground's treacherous here. But Clara had already dismounted, leading her horse carefully toward the stranded animals. Her boots sank deep in the mud with each step. The calves, seeing help approach, began moving toward them, their legs trembling. Suddenly, Clara's foot slipped. She pitched forward with a startled cry, but Jonas was there in an instant. His strong hand caught her arm, steadying her before she could fall. Easy now, he said softly, helping her regain her footing. Something flickered in his eyes, concern, mixed with admiration. Never met a woman willing to brave such weather in your condition. Together, they herded the calves to higher ground. By the time they turned back toward home, both were soaked to the skin, mud coating their boots and clothes. But as they stripped off their wet things by the cabin door, Clara surprised them both by laughing. What's so funny? Jonas asked, the corner of his mouth twitching. Look at us, she gestured to their mud-splattered appearance. Some fine sight we must be. Jonas's deep chuckle joined hers, the sound warming the cabin more than the fire he built. It was the first time they'd laughed together, and something shifted between them, as natural as the rain turning to sunshine. That evening, while Jonas checked the chicken coop, a rider appeared through the drizzle. He carried a single letter, addressed to Clara in a hand that made her heart stop. She tucked it quickly into her apron pocket, thanking the rider with trembling fingers. Later, alone in the bedroom, Clara opened the envelope. The familiar handwriting brought back memories of sweet promises and bitter betrayal. Dear Clara, word reached me of your condition. I confess the guilt weighs heavy, but my situation prevents me from offering more than this acknowledgement. I trust you understand. Thomas. Clara's hands shook as she folded the letter, hiding it between the pages of her mother's Bible. The words offered no real support, no true remorse, just empty phrases that changed nothing. She wasn't ready to share this with Jonas, not when trust was still so new between them. At supper, the letter's weight pressed against her conscience. Jonas noticed her picking at her food, her usual appetite absent. Everything all right? He asked, passing her the cornbread. Just tired from our morning adventure, she replied, forcing a smile. Jonas studied her face for a moment, but didn't press further. Instead, he cleared his throat. Wanted to say, you've shown real strength these past weeks. Standing tall despite the talk in town, working hard despite your condition. Even charging out in storms to save calves. He paused, his voice growing softer. Not every woman would have managed so well. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for your kindness, for giving me a chance when others wouldn't. The hidden letter seemed to burn in her Bible upstairs, but Clara pushed the thought away. This moment, with Jonas's quiet acceptance, felt too precious to taint with past shadows. After the dishes were done, they took their coffee out to the porch. The storm clouds were finally breaking, revealing patches of star-filled sky. They sat in comfortable silence, steam rising from their cups, while crickets began their evening song. Clara stole glances at Jonas's profile, noting how the stress lines around his eyes had softened. He caught her looking and offered a small smile that made her heart flutter. Whatever troubles tomorrow might bring, right now she felt safe in this place, with this man who had offered her shelter from more than just storms. Summer settled into a gentle rhythm at the Walker Ranch. Each dawn brought Clara to the kitchen, where she kneaded bread dough and fried salt pork while coffee perked on the wood stove. Jonas would already be out checking the cattle, his tall figure visible through the window as he rode the fence lines. The garden flourished under Clara's care. She planted rows of beans, carrots, and potatoes, tending them in the cool morning hours before the sun grew too hot for her condition. Her swollen belly made bending difficult, but she worked steadily, remembering her mother's lessons about coaxing life from rocky soil. In the evenings, lamplight cast a warm glow through the cabin windows. Jonas would clean his boots by the door, while Clara darned socks or worked on her latest project, a new shirt for him, cut from sturdy cotton. Her neat stitches formed perfect rows as they talked, their conversations growing easier with each passing night. Never had much skill with a needle myself, Jonas admitted one evening, watching her work. Sarah, my first wife, she was particular about her sewing too. Clara's hands stilled. It was the first time he'd spoken his late wife's name. Tell me about her? Jonas was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he stood and retrieved something from the trunk beneath his bed, a well-worn Bible, its leather cover soft with age. This was hers, he said, running his fingertips across the faded gilt letters. Haven't opened it since she passed. Clara set aside her sewing. Perhaps it's time, she suggested gently. The Lord's words can heal even the deepest hurts. Jonas didn't open the Bible that night, but he left it on the table instead of returning it to the trunk. Progress, Clara thought, like the slow unfurling of her garden plants. On Sundays, they rode to town for church services. Clara noticed the change in how people greeted them. Fewer whispers, more genuine smiles. Mrs. Holly even saved them seats in her pew. The transformation became clear when Preacher Matthews chose their marriage as the subject of his sermon. The Lord shows us that mercy trumps judgment, he proclaimed, his voice carrying to the rafters. When we open our hearts to those in need, we mirror his divine love. Clara felt tears well up as several heads nodded in agreement, but peace proved fragile. Jonas returned from checking cattle one afternoon, his expression dark. "Railroad men," he said grimly. "Neighbors spotted them near our water source." The next morning, they rode out together to inspect the irrigation ditch that fed their crops and cattle. The dirt along the bank held fresh boot prints, too many for casual passers-by. Jonas dismounted to examine them closer, his jaw tight with worry. "They're planning something," he said, helping Clara down from her horse. "Likely aimed to force us out by cutting off our water." Clara steadied herself against the saddle, about to respond, when she felt it, a strong flutter in her belly, different from any movement before. She gasped, pressing her hand to the spot. "What's wrong?" Jonas asked quickly, concern flooding his face. "The baby," Clara smiled, reaching for his hand. "Here, feel." Jonas hesitated, then let her guide his weathered palm to her middle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came another kick, strong and sure. Jonas's eyes widened in wonder. "Like a little colt," he whispered, and Clara saw moisture gather in the corners of his eyes. He didn't move his hand away, and they stood there together beside the irrigation ditch, sharing something profound and tender. The moment stretched, peaceful and perfect, until a distant coyote's cry reminded them of the lengthening shadows. They rode home as sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. That evening, Jonas cleaned his Winchester rifle with extra care, checking the action and sighting. Clara watched as he positioned it near the cabin door, within easy reach. "We'll protect what's ours," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. But when he joined her by the fire, his touch on her shoulder was gentle, a contrast to the weapon standing guard in the shadows. They sat together, listening to the pop and crackle of burning pine logs. Clara's sewing lay forgotten in her lap as she felt another flutter from the baby. Jonas's hand found hers in the firelight, their fingers intertwining naturally, like they'd always belonged together. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in pale stripes when Jonas first spotted the dark shapes by the irrigation ditch. At first, he thought the cattle had simply bedded down for the night. But as he drew closer, his horse nickered nervously, and the sour smell hit him, death lingering in the morning air. 3 of his best steers lay bloated beside the water, their bodies twisted in final agony. Jonas dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on frost-covered grass. The water in the ditch ran clear, but a white residue clung to the banks. He dipped a finger, touched it to his tongue, and spat immediately. Lie, the railroad men had poisoned his water supply. The loss struck him like a physical blow. Those cattle represented months of work, feed, and care, gone in one cruel night. Each beast was worth $50 or more, a fortune out here where cash was scarce. Jonas's hands shook as he clenched them into fists, rage building in his chest like steam in a sealed kettle. His first instinct was to ride straight into town, confront the railroad office with gun in hand. He'd already started toward his horse when Clara's voice called from the cabin porch. "Jonas, what's wrong?" She hurried toward him, one hand supporting her heavy belly. "They killed them," he ground out. "Poisoned the water. 3 of our best steers dead." He moved to mount up, but Clara caught his arm. "Please," she begged, seeing the fury in his face. "Don't ride in angry. They'll be waiting for that, looking to provoke you into something rash. They can't get away with this." His voice cracked like a whip. "They won't," Clara soothed. "But not like this. Not with violence." Jonas stood rigid, torn between rage and reason. Finally, his shoulders slumped. "Gotta bury them first anyway. Can't leave them to rot and draw scavengers." The grim work took hours. Jonas dug a deep pit while Clara brought him water and bread, hovering nearby with worry in her eyes. Each time he heaved a shovelful of dirt, he calculated the loss in his head, not just the dead cattle, but the poisoned ditch that would need clearing, the risk to his remaining herd, the feed wasted on beasts that would never go to market. When The last steer was buried. Jonas sat heavily on the porch steps, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool air. Clara settled beside him, twisting her hands in her apron. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. "Something I should have said before." Jonas looked at her, noting the fear in her expression. Clara went inside and returned with a crumpled letter, holding it out like it might burn her fingers. "It came last week," she whispered. From the baby's father." Jonas took the letter, unfolding it slowly. As he read, his face grew harder with each line. The man who had abandoned Clara was no common railroad worker. He was part of the company itself, working to secure water rights across the territory. "You knew," Jonas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You knew who he was, what he represented, and you didn't tell me." "I was afraid," Clara admitted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Afraid you'd think I was part of their scheme somehow. That you'd send me away. I trusted you." Jonas stood, the letter crumpling in his fist. "While they plotted against us, you kept their secrets." "No, I never meant." But Jonas was already striding toward the barn, betrayal burning in his chest. Clara's sobs followed him as he saddled his horse, checked his revolver, and swung into the saddle. The weapon felt heavy against his hip, its weight promising answers that words could not provide. "Jonas, please." Clara called after him. "Don't leave not like this." He spurred his horse forward without looking back, deaf to her pleas. The sun was setting as he rode toward town, painting the sky blood red. Grief warred with anger in his heart, grief for his dead cattle, for his shattered trust, for the gentle peace that had been growing between them like Clara's garden plants. Back at the cabin, Clara collapsed beside the hearth, her tears falling faster as sharp pains gripped her belly. Too early, the baby wasn't due for weeks yet. Another pain doubled her over, and she knew with terrible certainty that her time had come. "Please, Lord," she prayed, kneeling on the rough wooden floor. "Give me strength. Bring him back safe. Don't let anger poison his heart like they poisoned the water." Wind rattled the cabin shutters, and somewhere in the gathering dark, wolves began to howl. Clara pressed her hands to her middle, feeling another contraction build as she knelt alone in the firelight, waiting for Jonas to return. Hoofbeats thundered through the night as Jonas urged his horse down the moonlit trail toward town. His rage burned hot as the revolver at his hip, each stride bringing him closer to vengeance. The silver light caught his face, twisted with grief and betrayal, as memories of the poisoned cattle and Clara's hidden letter tormented him. The town lay quiet when he arrived, save for the yellow glow and raucous voices spilling from the saloon. Jonas reined his horse to a stop, dust settling around them in the midnight air. Through the grimy windows he could see Railroad Foreman Caldwell and his men drinking and laughing, celebrating their cruel victory, no doubt. Jonas's hand moved to his revolver, fingers curling around the smooth grip. One squeeze of the trigger could end this, could make them pay for every dead steer, every threat, every manipulation. His boots hit the dirt as he dismounted, the weapon heavy with deadly promise. But as he took his first step toward the saloon, doors, different images flashed through his mind. His first wife Sarah, pale and still in childbed, death taking her before he could even say goodbye. Clara's gentle strength as she faced town gossip with dignity. Her tears as he'd ridden away, leaving her alone at the ranch. The memory of her hand guiding his to feel the baby's kicks through her dress. Jonas froze, his breath catching. Violence had already stolen one wife from him. Would he risk losing another by choosing bullets over mercy? The thought of Clara, facing her labor alone while he pursued revenge, struck him like a physical blow. His boots turned away from the saloon, carrying him instead toward the small white church that stood silent under the stars. A lamp still burned in the window, and when Jonas knocked, Preacher Miller answered quickly, as if expecting him. "Come in, son," the older man said softly, reading the torment in Jonas's face. Inside the church, moonlight filtered through plain glass windows, painting silver stripes across empty pews. The preacher's desk held an open Bible and half-written sermon notes. Jonas stood rigid, struggling to speak, until his legs gave way and he found himself kneeling at the altar rail. "They killed my cattle," he choked out. "Poisoned the water. And Clara, she knew things, kept secrets about the railroad man who—" His voice broke entirely then, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Jonas Walker wept openly. Years of bottled grief and loneliness poured out as he knelt there, shoulders shaking. Preacher Miller laid a gentle hand on Jonas's shoulder. "The Lord knows your pain, son. But remember, true strength isn't found in the power to take life, but in the courage to preserve it. To choose mercy when vengeance seems sweeter." "I left her alone," Jonas whispered. "I was so angry, I just rode away. Left her there, carrying my name and another man's child, facing everything by herself. Then perhaps that's where you're needed. Most right now," the preacher said quietly. "Not here seeking revenge, but they're offering forgiveness." Miles away at the ranch, Clara paced the cabin floor, pausing every few minutes as contractions gripped her body. Sweat dampened her hair despite the cool night air, and fear clawed at her heart. The baby wasn't due for weeks yet. Something was wrong. "Please, Lord," she prayed, gripping the back of a chair as another pain washed over her. "Give me strength to endure this. Bring Jonas home. Don't let anger steal him away like it stole my baby's father." The empty cabin offered no comfort, only the crackle of the dying fire and the mournful howl of wolves in the distance. Clara's legs trembled with exhaustion as she tried to remember her mother's teachings about childbirth. But the pains came. Faster now, stronger, and her vision blurred with tears of fear and loneliness. Back at the church, Jonas rose slowly from his knees, his heart steadied by prayer and the preacher's wisdom. The rage that had driven him to town had drained away, leaving behind a desperate need to return home to Clara. "Thank you," he said hoarsely to Preacher Miller. "I reckon the Lord knew I needed to be here tonight instead of over there." He nodded toward the saloon. "Go home to your wife, son," the preacher smiled. "That's where healing begins." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Jonas swung into his saddle again. His horse, sensing his master's urgency, needed little encouragement to run. They thundered back along the trail, Jonas's heart pounding with fear that he'd stayed away too long. Each moment stretched like an eternity as he pressed homeward, praying he would reach Clara in time. The first rays of dawn painted the Colorado hills gold as Jonas and his lathered horse crested the final rise. Above his ranch, his breath caught at the sight of smoke rising from the cabin chimney. Clara was still there, still waiting. But was she all right? Had the baby come early? The question spurred him forward, desperate to cross the last distance between them. Dawn's first light spilled across the Colorado hills as Jonas Walker's horse thundered down the final stretch toward home. His heart pounded harder than the hoofbeats beneath him, fear driving him forward. The sight of smoke curling from his cabin's chimney gave him hope, but dread still coiled in his stomach. He yanked his horse to a stop, boots hitting dirt before the animal fully settled. Taking the porch steps two at a time, Jonas burst through the door, the wood banging against the wall. The sight before him stopped him cold. Clara gripped the back of a wooden chair, her knuckles white, her face contorted. In pain. Her legs trembled beneath her, and sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. She lifted her head at his entrance, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. "Jonas," she gasped, before another pain doubled her over. Without hesitation, he crossed the room and steadied her with strong hands. "I'm here now," he said softly. "I'm here, and I ain't leaving again." Memories from years past flooded back, watching the midwife tend to neighboring women, hearing her instructions during his first wife's labor. He helped Clara to the bed, his touch gentle despite his rough hands. "We need hot water," he said, forcing calm into his voice. Clean cloth, too. I watched Midwife Hanson enough times to know that much. While the water heated on the stove, Jonas gathered every clean sheet and towel in the cabin. His hands shook as he laid them out, but his voice remained steady as he began to pray aloud. Lord above, protect this mother and child. Grant them strength and safety through this trial. Clara's cry cut through his prayer. He rushed to her side, letting her grip his hand through the pain. Breathe slow now, he coached. Like the wind across the prairie, steady and sure. Hours crawled by like years. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Clara labored, her cries echoing off the cabin walls. Jonas wiped her brow with cool cloths, supported her back when she needed to walk, and whispered constant encouragement. You're the strongest woman I know, he told her between contractions. Braver than any man I ever met. When the pains grew unbearable, Clara sobbed, I can't do this. Jonas cupped her face in his weathered hands. Yes, you can. You're already doing it. God's with us right here, right now. The morning light had softened to afternoon gold when Clara's labor reached its peak. Jonas positioned himself to catch the baby, praying harder than he'd ever prayed before. One more push, he urged. One more. Clara gathered her remaining strength and bore down. Suddenly, a new sound filled the cabin, the lusty cry of a newborn baby boy. Jonas's hands trembled as he caught the tiny form, tears streaming freely down his face. He's perfect, Jonas choked out, quickly wiping the baby clean and checking him over. Strong and healthy as can be. He wrapped the infant in a soft blanket before placing him gently in Clara's waiting arms. She cradled their son closer, exhausted face glowing with joy and wonder. Thank you, Lord, she whispered, for this life, for your mercy, for bringing Jonas home in time. Jonas sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Clara's shoulders, the other hand touching the baby's tiny fingers. I promise you both, he said solemnly. I'll protect and love you with everything I have. You're my family now, both of you. As evening approached, Jonas built up the hearth fire and helped Clara and the baby settle into the rocking chair beside it. The warm light danced across their faces as they rested, all three together. The baby nursed contentedly while Jonas knelt beside them, still marveling at this miracle. I never thought I'd have this again, he admitted quietly. A family, someone to love. When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. Clara reached out and touched his cheek. God had other plans for us both, better than we could have imagined. The cabin grew cozy as night fell outside. Their small family huddled close by the fire, their bond forged stronger by the day's trials. The baby slept peacefully in Clara's arms, while Jonas kept watch over them both, his heart full of gratitude and love. Where there had been emptiness, now there was fullness. Where there had been loneliness, now there was belonging. The very walls of the cabin seemed to glow with the warmth of their newfound joy, their shared struggle transformed into shared blessing. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. By midday, dust clouds rose along the road as wagons approached the Walker Ranch. The first to arrive was Sarah Holley, her basket laden with fresh-baked bread and wrapped in clean linens. Land sakes, she called from the porch. Don't you dare get up, Clara Walker. I'll let myself in. More women followed, their arms full of offerings. Mary Peterson brought chicken broth still steaming in mason jars. Beth Thompson carried soft cloths and baby blankets she had stored away since her youngest outgrew them. The cabin's main room, usually so quiet, filled with gentle chatter and careful footsteps. Clara rested in bed, cradling Samuel while the women tended to her needs. They changed sheets, swept floors, and kept the soup pot simmering on the stove. Their practiced hands made quick work of tasks that would have overwhelmed the new mother. Outside, wagon wheels crunched on gravel as men from neighboring ranches arrived. They carried fence posts and tools, heading straight for the storm-damaged sections without waiting to be asked. Jonas stood in his dooryard, hat in hand, watching as John Hawley and Pete Thompson started work on the north pasture fence. "Ain't right for a man to mend fences alone when he's got a new baby to mind," Pete called out, driving a post into the softened earth. Jonas swallowed hard, unused to such generosity. "Much obliged," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. Afternoon sun was settling toward the hills when Preacher Mills rode up in his buggy. He climbed down slowly, his Bible tucked under one arm, and clasped Jonas's hand. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," the preacher said, smiling. "Who would have thought that morning you stood up for Clara would lead to such blessing?" Inside the cabin, the preacher gathered everyone around Clara's bed. He placed his hand gently on Samuel's head, offering prayers of thanksgiving and protection. The baby slept peacefully through it all. Tiny fingers curled against his mother's chest. When the blessing was done, Preacher Mills drew Jonas aside. "Brother Walker," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about your trouble with the railroad." Jonas tensed, but the preacher continued, "The territorial judge will be in Denver next month. With community support, we could file a petition against their strong-arm tactics. You're not the only rancher they're threatening." Jonas looked around his cabin, taking in the neighbors who had come to help, people he had kept at arm's length. For years, their presence filled his home with warmth he had almost forgotten could exist. "You reckon we'd have a chance?" he asked. "Together? Better than standing alone." Jonas nodded slowly. "Then I'll do it, for Clara and Samuel. For all of us." As evening approached, the visitors began to leave. Women promised to return with more food tomorrow. Men clasped Jonas's shoulder, assuring him they would finish the fence repairs soon. The cabin grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Peaceful rather than lonely. Clara sat propped up in bed, watching as Jonas carefully lifted Samuel from his makeshift cradle. The lamplight cast a soft glow over them both. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what to name him." Jonas settled into the chair beside her. "What's in your mind?" "Samuel," she suggested. "After your father." Jonas's breath caught. He looked down at the sleeping infant, remembering his father's strong hands and gentle heart. "Samuel Walker," he tested the name quietly. "Pa would have been proud to have him carry the name. Tell me about him?" Clara asked, reaching out to touch Jonas's arm. Jonas smiled, his eyes distant with memory. "He was a good man. Taught me everything. I know about ranching, about treating people right too." He paused, looking around the cabin. He would have loved seeing all these folks here today. He always said a man wasn't meant to live without community. Through the window, they could hear coyotes yipping in the distance, but their calls seemed less lonely now. The cabin glowed with lamplight, and the memory of laughter and friendly voices still echoed in its walls. Samuel stirred in Jonas's arms, making tiny sounds in his sleep. Clara watched them both, her heart full. The ranch that had seemed so isolated when she first arrived now felt like the center of a web of caring hands and hearts. "We're blessed," she whispered, touching Samuel's small fingers. "More than I ever dreamed possible." Jonas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Their small family sat together in the gentle lamplight, surrounded by the evidence of neighbors' kindness. Fresh bread cooling on the counter, new blankets folded nearby, the sounds of repaired fences creaking in the evening wind still sparkled on the grass when Jonas hitched the team to their wagon. He'd risen before dawn to ensure everything was ready for the long journey to the county seat. The horses stamped impatiently, their breath visible in the cool spring air. Clara emerged from the cabin carrying Samuel, wrapped snugly in the new blankets the neighbors had given them. Her shawl was pulled tight against the morning chill as Jonas helped her up onto the wagon seat, tucking a quilt around her and the baby. "Got enough provisions?" she asked, checking the basket at her feet. "Plenty," Jonas assured her, climbing up beside them. "Weather looks fair, but it'll be a full day's ride. The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, following the rutted trail that led toward town. Clara held Samuel close, protecting him from the jolts and bumps of the rough terrain. The baby slept peacefully, lulled by the steady motion. As morning warmed into afternoon, they passed other homesteads. Neighbors waved from their fields, knowing the walkers' destination. Word had spread about their petition against the railroad, and support had grown stronger with each passing day. The sun was high when they stopped to rest the horses by a clear stream. Jonas spread their simple lunch on a blanket while Clara nursed Samuel. The spring air was sweet with wildflowers, but neither could fully relax, knowing what waited at journey's end. "You reckon the judge will listen?" Clara asked softly, stroking Samuel's downy head. Jonas's jaw tightened. "He'll have to. We've got proof of the poisoned water, and neighbors willing to testify. Can't ignore that." They reached the county seat. As evening approached, the small town was larger than their own, with brick buildings lining the main street. Jonas helped Clara down from the wagon, then led them to the modest inn where they'd arranged lodging. The next morning, they walked to the courthouse, Samuel bundled against Clara's chest. The building loomed before them, its wooden steps worn by years of petitioners seeking justice. Inside, several of their neighbors already waited, including John Hawley and Pete Thompson. The judge, a silver-haired man with keen eyes, called their case. Jonas stepped forward, his hat in his hands, and presented the evidence they'd gathered: water samples from the poisoned ditch, written threats from railroad men, documented losses of cattle. "Your Honor," Jonas spoke clearly, though his voice was rough with emotion, "we ain't asking for special treatment. Just the right to keep what's rightfully ours." One by one, their neighbors stood to testify. John Hall described finding dead cattle by his own water source. Pete Thompson spoke of railroad men trespassing on his land, making similar threats. The railroad's lawyer, sleek in his city suit, argued about progress and necessary expansion. But the judge's expression remained stern as he listened to both sides. "The law exists to protect all citizens," the judge declared finally, his voice filling the courtroom. "I will hear this case formally. Until then, the railroad company is forbidden from any action against these properties without proper legal claim." Though it wasn't a final victory, Clara felt hope surge in her heart. Jonas's shoulders straightened, and their neighbors exchanged satisfied glances. The return journey felt lighter somehow, despite the same rough trail. Clara leaned against Jonas's shoulder as he guided the team homeward, Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms. When dusk approached, they stopped at a small roadside inn. Their room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed and a rough-hewn cradle provided by the innkeeper's wife. After their supper, Clara sat in the room's single chair, rocking Samuel gently as she sang the lullaby her mother had taught her. "Hush now, my darling, let peace fill your dreams, while stars light the sky and moon softly gleams." Jonas stood by the window, watching them both. The tenderness in Clara's voice filled the small room, and his heart swelled with love for his family. Samuel's tiny fingers curled around his mother's thumb as she sang, his face peaceful in sleep. They set out again at first light, eager to cover the last miles home. The morning air was crisp, and new grass sparkled green in the fields they passed. Spring's promise touched everything, tender leaves unfurling on trees, wildflowers dotting the prairie, birds calling from fence posts. Clara watched the familiar landscape roll past, Samuel secure in her arms, and felt profound gratitude. Beside her, Jonas handled the reins with steady hands, his presence as solid and reassuring as the ground beneath their wheels. They had faced the railroad company with courage and law rather than violence, and though the battle wasn't over, they had made their stand together. The sun climbed higher as they drove onward, lighting their way home. Spring sunshine warmed the weathered boards of the porch as Clara sat in the old rocking chair, Samuel nestled against her chest. The gentle motion soothed them both as she watched Jonas and the neighbors working at the irrigation ditch below. Their shovels flashed in the morning light as they hauled stones and cleared away debris from the sabotage. Though her body still ached from childbirth, Clara couldn't bear sitting idle. Every hour or two, she'd walk down with a bucket of cool water or fresh cornbread for the men. Jonas would pause his work, wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes softening as he watched her approach. "Ain't right for you to be up and about so soon," he'd protest gently. "Can't expect me to watch others work while I sit," Clara would reply, adjusting Samuel in her arms. She'd help where she could, holding tools, sorting smaller stones, or clearing branches from the path. One afternoon, the creak of wagon wheels announced Martha Hale's return. This time, her husband Tom struggled to unload a beautiful wooden cradle from their cart. Clara's breath caught at the sight of its smooth curves and careful craftsmanship. "Tom worked on it every evening this past week," Martha explained, her earlier judgment replaced by warmth. We wanted to make things right, show you both you belong here." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she ran her hand over the polished wood. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the gentle curves Tom had carved into the headboard. "I was wrong about you, Clara Walker," Martha admitted, her voice thick. "We all were. You've shown us what real strength looks like." The following Sunday, morning light streamed through the church's windows as Jonas and Clara stood before the congregation. Samuel, dressed in a white gown Clara had sewn from her wedding petticoat, slept peacefully in her arms. The same townsfolk who had once whispered cruel words now smiled warmly as the preacher blessed their son. "Samuel James Walker," the preacher proclaimed, sprinkling water on the baby's forehead, "we welcome you into God's family in this community." Clara felt Jonas's hand tighten around hers as their neighbors stepped forward one by one to offer blessings. Even the older women who had been harshest now cooed over Samuel, praising his healthy color and strong grip. After the service, Jonas led Clara to a quiet corner of the churchyard. The spring breeze carried the scent of wild roses as he turned to face her, emotion clear in his weathered features. "You brought faith back into my life," he said softly, touching Samuel's tiny hand. "After losing Sarah, I'd turned my back on God, couldn't see past my own grief. But you," he paused, searching for words, "you showed me there's still goodness in this world, still hope." Clara smiled through her tears, remembering the frightened girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach. Such a short time ago. "God writes better stories than men do," she whispered, leaning against his shoulder. "He knew what we both needed, even when we didn't." Samuel stirred between them, his small face peaceful in sleep. Around them, the congregation lingered in the yard, sharing Sunday greetings and plans for spring planting. No longer outcasts, Clara and Jonas stood among them as family, their path from shame to honor complete in God's perfect time. The summer evening wrapped the ranch in golden light as Clara finished washing the supper dishes. Weeks had settled them into comfortable patterns, Clara tending to Samuel in the house while Jonas worked with the cattle. Their small family had found its rhythm, as natural as breathing. Neighbors dropped by regularly now, bringing fresh vegetables or staying to help mend fences. Even old Widow Thompson, once the town's severest gossip, came bearing a jar of honey and lingered to rock Samuel. The railroad men, their plans tangled in legal proceedings, kept their distance from the Walker Ranch. After the dishes were dried, Jonas touched Clara's shoulder. "Come outside with me?" he asked softly. Clara nodded, gathering Samuel from his cradle. They stepped onto the porch into a symphony of cricket songs. Above them, stars blazed across the dark velvet sky, more than Clara had ever seen back in Kansas. Jonas cradled Samuel, his rough fingers gentle against the baby's small ones. "Look at these tiny fingers," Jonas whispered, wonder in his voice. Never thought I'd hold a child of my own again." He turned to Clara, his eyes bright in the starlight. "You brought so much courage to this place. Changed everything. This home, it won't ever know fear again. Only love." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she leaned against his shoulder. "You gave me what I needed most," she said softly. "A forever family, a place to belong." They stood together, watching the stars wheel overhead until the evening chill sent them. Back inside, lamplight spilled warm and golden through the cabin windows, welcoming them home. In the soft glow, they held each other close, mother, father, and child, their love a beacon of hope on the wide frontier. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.